My name is Valerie Henderson, and I'm from a small mountain town in northern Oregon. I'm a nurse by profession, but what I'm about to share with you goes far beyond anything science or medicine could ever explain. This happened to me in the early autumn of 2011, a time when my life was ordinary, simple routines, long shifts at the hospital, and quiet evenings on my porch sipping tea as the sun dipped behind the hills. I never imagined that in the blink of an eye, everything I believed about life, death, and what lies beyond could be flipped completely inside out. That particular day had started out just like any other. It was a Sunday, and I'd just gotten home from a 12-hour overnight shift. I was exhausted, but the sky was clear, and the air carried that crisp, earthy scent that only autumn brings, so I decided to relax out back for a bit. I remember I was holding my phone, scrolling aimlessly through photos, when out of nowhere, dark clouds rolled in like an invading army. It happened so fast. I could feel the change in the air, heavy, electric. There was a sharp crack of thunder, louder than anything I'd ever heard before. I barely had time to react when I saw a blinding flash, and in an instant, it felt like my entire body exploded from the inside out. The lightning hit my left shoulder directly, tore through my chest, and exited through my ankle, sending me flying backward into the railing. The last sensation I remember was this burning, unbearably intense, as if fire had been injected into my veins. And then, silence. But it wasn't really silence. It was something else, like a hum, a vibration, soft and deep and powerful. I didn't realize I'd left my body. I didn't even know I was dead. At first, I thought I had passed out and was dreaming. I found myself standing in my living room, only it wasn't quite my living room. Everything had this shimmering amber glow, like someone had draped the world in sunlight and gold. My sofa was replaced by an antique divan I'd never seen before. The paintings on the walls were different. Even the floor had changed from my usual hardwood to a delicate marble-like tile, smooth and warm beneath my feet. I wandered through the house in a daze. The kitchen looked familiar, but wrong. My oak cabinets had turned to something dark and glossy. The countertops were covered in elegant porcelain I didn't own. I remember stopping in front of the window and seeing my own reflection, but not quite. I looked younger, healthier. My hair, usually pulled up in a messy bun, flowed effortlessly down my back, shiny and full. My skin glowed. It was me, but more complete. I could smell lilacs in the air, though there were none around. Then I heard it. Music. Not the kind you hear on a radio, but something old, grainy, nostalgic, like it was being played on a record from the 1920s. A soft jazz melody, distant but unmistakable. I started searching for the source, opening cabinets, checking behind curtains, but I found nothing. The sound seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Just when a creeping panic began to set in, when I started wondering if I had lost my mind, it appeared. That presence. I still struggled to describe it properly. It had no face, no body, no voice, just love. Immense, overwhelming love. It was like being wrapped in warmth, like every comforting memory I'd ever had was happening all at once. I wasn't afraid anymore. That presence filled the space completely. Its hug didn't need arms. I felt it. I knew it knew me, and it was guiding me somewhere. We moved sideways, not up, not down. It felt like we were gliding on a wind that didn't blow. The walls dissolved into clouds. Soft, rose-tinted clouds tinged with golden light. We traveled quickly, faster than thought, and yet I felt no rush, only peace. When we stopped, I was standing in the most exquisite garden I had ever seen. The sky was bluer than sapphire, and the air carried a sweetness I'd never tasted before. The flowers looked like they were painted by a divine hand, colors beyond anything the human eye is used to. The grass under my feet sparkled with dew that felt like silk. Birds chirped, not just in harmony, but with intention, like they were singing just for me. And still, I hadn't realized what had truly happened. I stood in that garden for what felt like eternity, and no time at all. It was as if time had unraveled itself. There were no ticking seconds, no rush, no past or future, only presence, only now. As I stepped further in, I noticed something strange yet oddly comforting. People. Dozens of them, maybe more. They were gathering slowly, drifting toward me from between the trees and the flower-lined paths. Every single person looked radiant, like their very essence glowed from within. But what struck me most was their age, or lack of it. No one looked older than their mid-30s. No one looked tired. There were no signs of illness, no sorrow on any face. And the clothes, some wore suits and dresses from eras long gone, others in modern casual wear, as if they'd just stepped out of a sidewalk cafe. Yet there was a harmony in the way they fit together, like time didn't divide them anymore. I remember staring at a woman in a long emerald dress with lace cuffs. She smiled at me with such recognition that it made my chest tighten. I didn't know who she was, but I knew her. And that was the theme. All these people, I somehow knew them, deep down in the marrow of my soul, even if my mind couldn't name them. It felt like a family reunion with relatives from lifetimes ago. There was no awkwardness, no words were needed, only love. That's when I saw them. Two men walking slowly toward me from the edge of the garden. They were tall, dressed in garments so finely woven they looked weightless, glowing softly with light that came from within. At first, I thought they were angels, but something shifted inside me, like a bell ringing. I just knew. These were my cousins, David and Elias. They had both died in infancy, long before I was born. I'd only ever seen their names on the family tree at my grandmother's house. And yet, here they were. Grown men, beautiful, strong, smiling just like my father used to when he was young. The recognition hit me not through memory, but through something deeper. It was like a divine download. I didn't question it. I just embraced it. And when I hugged them, I felt completeness. It was them who told me. "You died, Valerie," David said gently. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just nodded. I knew they were telling the truth, and somehow that truth was okay. Because here, I wasn't afraid. Here, I was known completely and still loved. They stood beside me as more souls gathered, surrounding me in a wide circle. And then the light behind me shifted. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. I could feel it. That same loving presence that had pulled me from my body now stood just behind my shoulder, tall and vast and full of a love so pure, it made every love I'd known on earth feel like a flickering candle. And then it began. My life review. I know what you're probably imagining. A slow-motion replay, dramatic music, maybe a booming voice listing my mistakes. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, I saw it all on a curved screen in front of me. Black and white at first, flickering like an old reel-to-reel movie. My childhood, my teenage years, college, the nights I cried alone, the patients I comforted as a nurse, the moments I was kind and the moments I wasn't. All of it flowed in seconds, like light flashes across water. There was no judgment, no voice yelling bad or good, only observation, acceptance, and love. The most surprising part? It ended fast. I blinked, and it was over. I actually laughed and whispered, "Was that it?" But I felt it, that something more was coming. The deeper truths were just around the bend in that eternal garden. Before we continue, I want to invite you to take a breath. This story isn't just mine. It touches something universal. If it's resonating with you, if even a part of you is feeling that tug, that sense of curiosity or recognition, then I'd love for you to become part of this journey with me. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking together through stories that awaken something deeper. And here's something a little different. I'd love for you to share in the comments one moment in your life that felt like more than coincidence. A dream, a sign, a feeling you couldn't explain. Let's build a space where we're not afraid to wonder together. As I stood there, my life freshly unfolded before me like a completed manuscript. I expected someone, anyone, to make a comment, to assess or critique. But there was only silence. Loving, patient silence. My cousins stood on either side of me, their expressions peaceful, almost playful, as if they were in on some divine joke I hadn't caught yet. And behind me, that vast presence radiated unwavering peace. I turned slightly toward Elias, confusion tugging at my thoughts. "Is that it?" I asked him. "That was my whole life?" He just smiled and said nothing, but his eyes sparkled with warmth. I felt as though I was missing something important, like I'd glanced at a masterpiece too quickly. The life review wasn't about punishment or pride. It was about understanding, about seeing the chain of cause and effect in its purest form. And in that moment, something strange started happening. I began to feel a pressure in my chest, not painful, but full, as if something vast and ancient was flowing into me, like water into a vessel long dry. I wasn't learning facts. I was receiving knowledge. It wasn't being told to me. I was simply knowing it. And one idea stood out first among all the others, rising above them like a mountain. Everything we do, say, or think, everything creates a ripple. It was explained to me, not in words, but through what I can only call infused understanding, that our intentions are not invisible. They're alive. They move out into the universe like waves, and eventually return, amplified. If we send out cruelty, that cruelty doesn't just affect others. It comes back to shape us. If we send love, even quietly, even when no one sees, it matters. It changes things. That's when I was shown what I can only describe as a kind of cosmic boomerang effect. I saw my actions, tiny ones I barely remembered, unfolding into consequences I never imagined. The times I spoke with genuine kindness to strangers, smiled at patients on their worst days, listened when someone just needed to be heard. I saw those moments lighting paths for others, even years later, rippling out far beyond what I could see. But I also saw the other side. Sharp words I'd spoken in exhaustion, judgments I'd made silently, unaware they carried weight. Those too returned, slower perhaps, but just as sure. Not as punishment, but as lessons, as invitations to heal what I had misunderstood. It wasn't scary. It was fair. More than fair, it was beautiful. As this knowledge filled me, we began to move again, gliding effortlessly deeper into the garden. The air changed. It became lighter somehow, more fragrant. I could feel the colors around me, not just see them. The blue sky hummed with a sound like soft singing, as if even the air itself was alive and celebrating. Then I began to hear the music again. Only this time, it wasn't faint or distant. It was all around me, immense and rich. Not just a single melody, but layers upon layers of harmonies. Deep drums, soaring violins, gentle chimes. Every flower, every breeze, every pebble beneath my feet was singing. It wasn't random, it was worship. Every part of this place was offering praise, not from obligation, but from joy. I could hear the trees. Their leaves swayed with purpose, like instruments being played by divine hands. The streams trickling beside the path contributed delicate melodies, crystalline and flowing. Even the light itself had tone, soft and golden and warm, like a lullaby that never needed to end. And somehow I realized this music was always there. It wasn't made for me, but I was being allowed to hear it. That was the gift. In life, we're too distracted. The noise of our world drowns out this song. But here, in this eternal garden, the music was everywhere. It was what held everything together. I wept, not out of sadness, but because I had never known such beauty could exist. Because I realized I'd been living so close to wonder my whole life, but with my eyes half closed. And in that moment, something changed in me. I stopped asking questions. I stopped needing to understand. I just walked, not to arrive somewhere, but to be with it all. With them, with the music, with God, with myself. There were no words, only peace. As we continued moving through the garden, the path beneath my feet began to shift, subtly at first. The vibrant grass gave way to polished stones that shimmered like moonlight, smooth and cool beneath my steps. Ahead of me, through a line of tall cypress trees swaying gently in rhythm with the music, I saw something I'll never forget. A city. Not a city like we know, with noise and clutter and rush, but something ancient and new all at once. It sat within golden walls that glowed with a light that didn't come from the sun. The city itself radiated this brilliance, gentle, not blinding. At its center stood a round structure with a radiant dome, shining so brightly that I could only look at it through the edges of my vision. There were towers and halls and walkways that seemed to move with purpose, as though the architecture itself was alive and aware of who walked among it. And yet nothing was intimidating. It welcomed me, not through words, but through a deep, unspoken invitation. We approached slowly. The air here was different, richer, almost sweet. I could feel it on my skin, like the very particles carried joy. The music had softened now, but it still pulsed under everything like a sacred heartbeat. As I drew nearer to the outer buildings, I began to notice something extraordinary. Each structure seemed to hold a different kind of energy. One building to my left had an open courtyard and a pool that sparkled like liquid crystal. Around it, I could see beings, souls, resting. Not asleep, but in peace, soaking in something that felt like restoration. It wasn't just water, it was alive. This was, as I later understood, a place of healing. a space for those who had arrived carrying deep sorrow or trauma, those who hadn't had a gentle end. Here, they were not scolded or fixed, but gently loved back into themselves. Another hall I passed was grand and towering, its doors tall and intricate with carvings I didn't recognize, but felt drawn to. Inside, I saw what looked like endless shelves, filled with books, millions perhaps, scrolls, volumes, glowing manuscripts that seemed to pulse with their own light. This was not just a library, it was a sanctuary of knowledge, what I began to call the Hall of Understanding. Here I was told every question had an answer, but not all questions were meant to be asked at once. The knowledge there wasn't about facts, it was about truth. Layers upon layers of spiritual, emotional, and universal truth. I wasn't ready to go in, not yet, but just knowing it existed brought me peace. Farther out, I glimpsed a place full of laughter. A wide hall with chandeliers that hung like starlight frozen mid-twinkle. People were dancing, really dancing, unrestrained, joyous, free. There was music here too, different from the garden's harmony. It was warm, rhythmic, full of movement. Tables were set with fruits and cakes and drinks that seemed to glow faintly. The smell of spices and sweetness filled the air. It was a celebration, not of an event, but of being. One woman passed me in a dress of deep violet. Her hair shimmered like copper in the light. She smiled and said nothing, but as her hand brushed mine, I felt something I hadn't in years. Delight. Pure, innocent delight. It was intoxicating. I realized then, joy wasn't a reward in this place. It was the language. And still, the most profound part was how nothing demanded anything of me. There were no sermons, no expectations. I wasn't being evaluated or measured. I was simply seen, entirely, and loved, entirely. As I stood at the threshold of the city, I paused, overwhelmed not by fear, but by reverence. The kind of awe that makes your soul quiet. I had never in my life experienced such stillness inside, not even as a child. But then, just beyond the grove of silver-leafed trees that flanked the city's edge, I saw movement, gentle and calm. Someone was walking toward me, and I knew instantly who it was. Not because I saw his face clearly at first, but because of the overwhelming current of recognition that swept through me like a tide returning to shore. Jesus. He moved with a calm that wasn't just physical, it was cosmic. Every step he took seemed to soften the space around him. The air itself leaned toward him in reverence, and I could feel the whole garden responding. As he came closer, I could see more clearly. Long, earth-dark hair that gently framed his face, deep brown eyes that carried galaxies within them, and skin kissed with the kind of warmth only found in desert light. He didn't float. He didn't radiate with blinding force. He walked, solid and sure, as if he had always known exactly where I would be. I couldn't move. Not because I was frozen with fear, but because something ancient inside me had gone still, like a child who finally sees their parent after a long, confusing search. My cousins, who had been standing beside me, quietly stepped away the moment he arrived. I didn't even notice them leaving. I only felt the change in atmosphere, the singular focus drawn to this one being who now stood just feet from me. He looked at me, and in that gaze, time disappeared. There was no past version of me, no future me, just the full, raw truth of my existence, held with a tenderness that melted every wound I'd ever carried. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand answers. He simply said 3 words, "I love you," and that was enough. That single phrase unraveled the knots of shame and self-doubt that had gripped me for years. His voice wasn't loud, but it was rich, layered with understanding, patience, and power. It moved through me like music, like water, like fire that doesn't burn. When he spoke, every cell in me answered. Then he added, "I'm with you. Don't be afraid." At that moment, something inside me cracked wide open. Tears filled my eyes, not out of sadness, but because it finally made sense. Everything I had been through, all the moments of loneliness, all the nights I had whispered into the darkness hoping someone was listening. He had been. He always had. But I didn't fully understand what those words meant until he took my hand and guided me into a clearing. It was quiet here, more intimate. Light filtered softly through the trees, dappling the ground in gold. A small wooden log sat beneath a wide tree, and he gestured for me to sit. And then, as gently as he had arrived, he stepped back, giving space. That's when I noticed there was someone else at the other end of the log. A man, older in appearance, but not aged, His presence was immense, but he didn't try to impress me. He simply was. His features were different from Jesus. Short, dark curls, crystal clear blue eyes, a countenance filled with endless patience. I somehow knew this was God, not the formless presence from before, but now, taking a form I could relate to. This wasn't the wrathful figure I'd heard about in sermons, nor the distant cosmic force some people describe. This was someone who leaned in close, who saw me, who asked gently, "What would you do if it was just me and you?" The question stunned me. I blinked, trying to grasp it, but it slipped through my fingers like water. I felt like a child asked to define the universe. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I don't know, I whispered honestly. He just smiled. There was no judgment, no rush. He repeated, just as gently, "What would you do if it was only me and you? No parents, no job, no titles, no roles, just us?" Still, I had no answer. Instead of pressing, he stood and offered his hand. I took it, and together we walked deeper into the woods. The trees gave way to another open space, and this time the sky peeled open, literally. It unfolded like a curtain being drawn back from the cosmos. And there, above and around and within, I saw everything. Galaxies spinning in rhythmic precision, bursts of light and color, gases that moved like slow-burning flames. I saw infinity, and yet I felt no smallness. I was part of it, known by it, anchored in it. He turned to me, eyes sparkling, and I realized then, this wasn't just about where I had gone, it was about who I had always been. As I stood there, staring into the endless folds of the universe, I felt a question forming in me. Not one I consciously chose, but one that seemed to rise naturally from the depth of my soul. I turned toward God, unsure of how to ask something so vast, so fragile, but I didn't have to speak it. He already knew. Without a word, he gently turned my gaze back toward a single tree just a few steps away. It wasn't the most impressive tree, no dazzling colors or massive branches. Just a simple tree, bark rough and roots buried deep. But the moment I looked at it, I saw everything. I could see below the surface, roots drawing water and nutrients from the soil, each cell within the wood reaching, expanding, breathing. I saw how the leaves took in sunlight, how they converted it into life, how they released clean air. I saw animals that nested in its branches, the wind weaving through its limbs, the rain sliding down its trunk into the earth. It wasn't just a tree. It was connected to everything. The very existence of that one tree was woven into a larger pattern, alive and meaningful. And then I heard myself say, without knowing where the words had come from, "You are in this tree." God turned to me, smiling, eyes soft with joy. "Yes," he said, with a warmth that made the moment feel eternal. I wasn't just observing creation anymore. I was part of it. The lines that had separated me from everything else had quietly dissolved. That's when more thoughts came to me, gently, like leaves falling into my mind from a higher place. I thought of my parents, my childhood, the times I had misunderstood them or taken their presence for granted. I looked at God again and whispered, "You are in my parents." "Yes," he said again. Then I thought of my children, of their laughter, their fears, the moments when I didn't know how to comfort them. And I said, "You are in my children." He nodded. "Yes." And then came something harder. People who had hurt me, people who had said cruel things, who had tried to break parts of me, knowingly or not. I didn't want to think of them, not here, but they came anyway. And the same quiet realization followed. "You are in them too." His reply didn't change. "Yes," he said. "That's right." It stopped me. Not in resistance, but in reflection. He wasn't saying that what they did was okay. He wasn't asking me to forget or excuse. But he was showing me something larger, that his presence wasn't limited by behavior or belief, that his essence was within all things, even those I found difficult to love, even those I had refused to see. Then he turned to me and said, "Now I have a question for you." I froze. There was a weight to his tone, not heavy in burden, but in depth, like what came next would matter deeply. I nodded, unsure of what was coming. "When you look in the mirror," he said, "what do you see?" I wanted to answer right away, to say something wise or humble or grateful, but my mind filled instead with every harsh word I'd ever internalized, every criticism I'd heard, every flaw I'd believed about myself, that I wasn't enough, that I was too much, that I had failed too often. that my worth depended on how useful, pretty, thin, strong, smart, or quiet I could be. But I couldn't say any of that out loud, not to God. So I took a breath and said the only truth I could find. You made me. You are in me. So, when I look in the mirror, I see you. And the way his face lit up in that moment, it was like watching the first sunrise ever created. He didn't need my answer, but he rejoiced in it. Not because it flattered him, but because I had finally seen myself the way he did. You are not what the world says you are, he said softly. You are not the names it gave you. You are what I made you, and I make no mistakes. That sentence, simple, direct, cracked something open in me. And from that moment on, I knew I could never see myself, or anyone else, the same way again. After that conversation, something in the air shifted. I could feel it in the light, in the way the trees rustled, even in the sound of my own breath. God looked at me once more, gently, and then stepped back. Without needing to say a word, I knew he wasn't leaving. I was being led somewhere else. That's when two figures appeared, tall, graceful, their presence soft, but unmistakably powerful. Angels. Not with wings or robes as often imagined, but clothed in light and purpose. Their energy was calm, patient. One extended a hand to me, and I took it instinctively, without fear. We didn't fly. We didn't walk in the way we do on Earth. We shifted. The scenery around us dissolved, folding inward like the turning pages of a book, and reformed into something else entirely. Suddenly, I stood beside a still body of water. It was vast, but perfectly calm, so clear it looked like glass, not a single ripple disturbing its surface. When I looked into it, I expected to see only my reflection, but what I saw was something else entirely. The water didn't show me. It showed the world, but not as it was then, as it would be. The first image was subtle. I saw marketplaces, shelves, empty ones. I saw people moving through them, not with urgency, but with confusion, trying to understand why everything familiar was suddenly gone. There was tension in the air, and something deeper than fear. It was a disconnection, a lack of trust. Systems that once seemed unshakable had started to tremble. I understood instantly. This was about money. A collapse, not just financial, but foundational. People were realizing that the systems they relied on could no longer carry the weight of the world's imbalance. Then I saw more. Crowds gathering, some in protest, some in desperation. Cities dark at night, screens with flashing alerts in different languages. But alongside that, I saw quiet acts of unity. People lighting candles, sharing food, singing in places where silence had once ruled. It was a time of breaking, but also of awakening. I turned to the angels, unsure of what to say, of whether I was meant to simply watch or respond. One of them spoke, not aloud, but within me. A thought placed like a seed. These things do not have to happen. I blinked, but I just saw them. I replied, somehow speaking without sound. What you saw is what follows when hearts close, when selfishness becomes stronger than compassion. But humanity has a choice, always. Another wave of images moved across the water, faster now. Natural disasters, yes, but also man-made ones. Division, war, economic fear, environmental imbalance. But again, always alongside the chaos were moments of incredible love. Strangers helping strangers. Communities growing gardens where parking lots once stood. People listening, really listening, to each other again. Children teaching their elders how to hope. Then the image shifted one last time. I saw something I hadn't expected. Myself, back in my body, back on Earth, but changed. Older, a little grayer, but more present, more grounded. And I was speaking, not to crowds, not on stages, but in kitchens, in living rooms, in parks, telling my story, reminding people of what I'd seen, what I'd felt, what I knew now to be true. I wasn't leading revolutions. I wasn't performing miracles. I was simply planting seeds, and those seeds mattered. The angel beside me placed a hand on my shoulder, not heavy, but anchoring, like a reminder, a responsibility. I looked again at the waters, still so calm, yet holding so much. What am I supposed to do with all this? I asked. Remember, the angel said, you were never meant to fix the world. You were meant to love it, and in loving it, you will help heal it. That truth settled into me like rain into dry ground. Not everything was mine to carry, but love always was. The scene began to fade. the glassy lake dissolving into light, and I felt a tug, not physical, but unmistakable. I was being called back. Somewhere far away, I could feel the distant thrum of my heartbeat again. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to leave, but I understood. The moment I felt that pull, something in me instinctively resisted. Not from fear. There was no fear in this place, but from a quiet ache. I had finally found wholeness. Not perfection, not escape, but the full understanding of who I was and where I truly belonged. And now, I was being asked to return to a life that had once felt confusing and incomplete. The light around me began to dim, not like a sunset, but like curtains being slowly drawn. I turned, hoping for one last glimpse of the garden, the city, the faces I had come to love. And that's when I saw him again, Jesus, standing where the trees met the path, watching me with the kind of love that needs no words. He didn't come closer this time. He didn't need to. His message was clear, carried by that steady gaze. You are not alone. I am with you, always. Then I felt the angels again, flanking me. Their presence steadied me, like two pillars of quiet strength. I could sense them preparing me, not through ritual or instruction, but with intention. They were helping me let go. As we began to shift again, the sensation was very different than when I had first arrived. This time, it was heavier. Not painful, just denser. Like diving back into a deep ocean after floating freely in the open sky. The light around me thickened, the air folded in, and soon I could no longer hear the music. And then, darkness. Not emptiness, not fear, just stillness. Then, pain. A sharp electric jolt tore through my chest. I gasped, eyes flying open, and for a moment I had no idea where I was. The colors were gone, the music silenced. I was lying on the ground behind my house, rain soaking my skin, my phone several feet away, still buzzing faintly on the concrete. My body was rigid, aching. My right arm burned so fiercely I thought it was still on fire. I could smell something sharp, like ozone and scorched fabric. I tried to move, but my limbs didn't obey right away. My vision blurred, ears ringing with a sound that felt too small compared to what I had just left. Everything was wrong. Too quiet, too cold, too heavy. I don't remember how long I laid there. Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, I was found. Neighbors saw the smoke from the transformer that had blown when the lightning hit and called for help. Paramedics arrived. I heard voices, muffled, as if they were underwater. I remember someone shining a light into my eyes, saying my name over and over. I couldn't respond. I didn't know how to bring myself fully back. In the hospital, I drifted between worlds for days. My body fought seizures. My heart had suffered damage, a condition called a right bundle branch block, they told me. The doctors called it rare. They said I was lucky to be alive, but alive felt like the wrong word for a long time. I was returned, reinserted into a life I now saw with completely new eyes, and yet still had to learn how to live in again. The world was louder, heavier, but I also noticed things I hadn't before, like how sunlight danced across the kitchen floor in the early morning, or how the wind whispered between the trees at dusk. I noticed kindness in strangers. I noticed how pain changed people, and how silence sometimes carried more healing than words. I didn't speak about what happened for a long time, not because I doubted it, but because I didn't know how to carry something so sacred in a world that often treats sacred things as foolish. But the memories didn't fade. They grew. They breathed with me. I would see him in dreams, not always with a message, sometimes just a presence, a reminder, and I would sometimes wake up with tears in my eyes, heart full to bursting, aching for something I couldn't explain. But I also began to understand, slowly, that I hadn't been sent back as punishment or test. I had been trusted with something, and that trust would shape everything I did from that moment on. Waking up fully into the rhythm of life again was like learning a language I once spoke but had forgotten. Everything was familiar, but it no longer made sense in the same way. The world looked the same, but I didn't see it the same. Even simple things, coffee brewing, rain tapping against the windows, the way a stranger glanced at me in passing, were layered with meaning now. I carried the memory of that other place with me, not like a dream, but like a second heartbeat under my skin. At first, I tried to slip back into who I had been. I went back to work at the hospital. I answered questions. I smiled when people asked if I was doing okay. But something inside had shifted permanently. I could no longer rush through life. I couldn't treat people as tasks or diagnoses. I saw them, all of them, clearly. I saw what sat behind their words, behind their silence, their pain, their fear, their longing. It was as if the veil had been thinned, and now I could hear the quiet ache that most people carried but never spoke aloud. My patience changed too, though they didn't know why. I began spending more time just being with them. Sometimes all I did was hold a hand in silence. No charting, no treatment plan, just presence. And often that was what they needed most. Some would look at me strangely, as if I reminded them of something they couldn't place. Others would cry without knowing why. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of this world was too much. Days when the noise of society, the speed of our lives, and the shallow way people often interact left me feeling deeply, painfully homesick for that garden, that stillness, that love. I longed for it in ways I couldn't put into words. Not because life here was bad, but because the fullness I had tasted made everything here feel like a reflection in a fogged mirror. But in those moments of longing, I remembered what the angel told me at the lake. You were never meant to fix the world. You were meant to love it. So I began to love in the smallest ways. I planted a tree outside my window and whispered gratitude to it every morning. I started writing letters to people who had hurt me, not to send, but to release. I volunteered at a local shelter on my days off, not to be a savior, but simply to show up and see the divine in people who had been forgotten. I paid attention to the elderly woman at the grocery store who always seemed invisible to others. I smiled at children, even when I felt tired. I let myself be quiet when the world shouted, and slowly, gently, things began to grow inside me. Not answers, not certainty, but peace. And not the kind that comes from avoiding hardship, but the kind that holds your hand through it. The kind that whispers, you are not alone, even when you're sitting in an empty room. That's the peace I brought back with me. My relationships changed. I began to speak more openly with my parents. I told them I loved them every time we spoke, something I used to feel too awkward to do. I watched my children more closely, not to correct them, but to see them, to recognize the light in them and mirror it back to them. I learned to forgive people, not because they earned it, but because I refused to carry the poison of resentment in a body that had been given a second chance. And the most surprising part? I started to see God in places I never had before. In the man sleeping on the park bench. In the nurse next to me on night shift who cried in the break room. In the broken sidewalk. In the sunrise behind traffic lights. In my own reflection when I was too tired to pretend to be strong. I understood finally what it meant when God asked me that question on the log. What would you do if it was just me and you? Because now I lived every day knowing, at the deepest level, that it always is. Even now, years later, I carry that place within me. It's not just a memory, it's a compass. And some days, I still ache for it. Not in a way that pulls me from life, but in a way that grounds me deeper into it. Because once you've stood in the presence of perfect love, you can't unknow it. You don't return the same. You can't. And truthfully, I don't want to. Because that love wasn't given to me just to keep hidden in my heart like some secret treasure. It was given so I could reflect it, so I could become it. In all the little moments that make up a life, in the pauses between words, in the choices made when no one's looking, in how I see people, not for who they appear to be, but for who they really are. Sometimes people ask me if I'm afraid to die again, and I always answer honestly, not even a little, because death isn't what we think it is. It isn't an end or an exile. It's a return, a remembering. But until that time comes again for me, I live fully. I laugh harder. I listen deeper. I forgive quicker, and I remind myself every day that this world, even with all its pain and confusion and noise, is still holy ground. Every soul you meet is carrying a story you cannot see. Every word you speak is a seed you cannot track, and every act of love, no matter how small, echoes across eternity. I was sent back not because I was special, but because I was ready to see, to feel, to serve in a way I hadn't before. And I don't need everyone to believe my story. That's not the point. What I hope, more than anything, is that hearing it awakens something in you. A memory, a question, a spark of recognition. Because I believe with all my heart that many of you have touched that sacred place before. In a dream. In a near miss. In a feeling you couldn't explain. You felt it. Maybe just for a moment. Maybe longer. And maybe hearing this helps you trust it a little more. I want this space, this community we're building together, to be one where we don't dismiss what's invisible just because it's unfamiliar, where we ask the deeper questions, where we listen, really listen, to each other's moments of awakening. So, from my heart to yours, I invite you to stay with me on this journey. If this story stirred something inside you, if it made you remember something you didn't know you'd forgotten, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. But not just because that's what people say to do. Do it because you want to walk forward together into more stories that reconnect us to the truth beneath all things. And I have a little request, one that I hope you'll consider from the quietest part of your heart. Would you share your story with us? It doesn't have to be dramatic or perfect. Maybe it was a moment you felt something watching over you, a dream that left you changed, a coincidence that felt too perfect to ignore. Whatever it was, we want to hear it. This isn't just a video, it's a gathering place, a conversation. And every comment becomes a thread in something much bigger than any one of us alone. So tell us, what did this story make you feel? What did it remind you of? And what truth did it awaken in you? We're here to hold those stories with reverence, with love, just like I was held in that garden that night, when lightning turned my world inside out so I could finally see it clearly. Thank you, truly, for being here, for listening, for remembering. You're not alone. You never were. And you never will be.